Okay, welcome to this very short film of a very short discussion with Caroline Bartlett, the textile artist, about her exhibition here at the Craft Study Centre, Restless Dynamic. And Caroline, can we start with that actually, the title, A Restless Dynamic? Could you tell me where that came from?
It's a phrase that occurs in a paper written by Patrick Dillon and Surfer Coco. Craft is cultural and ecologically located practice, in which they discuss various elements of the interplay of factors that brings change and continuity in makers' work. And given that I was looking at the work of Lucy Ree and the history of many of the other pieces that are in here, they refer to this as a restless dynamic, the fact that things are in constant flux. And I thought that was quite an appropriate title.
And do you feel that you've expressed that in your work as well?
Yes, I think there's been an element of that, certainly.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that's been present in your work before you thought you actually...
Yes, I think it's been ongoing. And sort of, in the background with a lot of the pieces.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a compressed energy in your work, which one feels when looking at it. I mean, that's partly the pleats, I imagine, but also you feel almost as it could expand beyond the edges of the work. I mean, there are pieces, all of them, in fact, that you've actually played with that.
Yes, to a degree, certainly.
Yeah.
And that there are within them. There's many layers of meaning. So from the more abstract to things that are much more based on historical fact and so on.
Okay. And is it important for you that people understand the underlying layers of meaning, or that they just accept them as works of art and that's the surface value?
I think there's an element of both, because sometimes it does help the viewer to engage more with the work.
Well, now we've spoken about this notion of the restless dynamic and how that really seemed to resonate with how your reading of Lucy Ree's life and work. Shall we go and look at the work you've made in response to Lucy Ree? Good. So, Caroline, here we are with your works, which you've titled Homage, which have been influenced by Lucy Ree's life and work. Could you possibly tell us how you have responded and what you've responded to in Lucy's work, in your work, Homage?
Well, it's been quite an interesting process, because when I came in with discussion about how this exhibition was going to be, and it was drawing on elements from previous work, and responding to something within the collection. I saw in one of the cabinets some of Lucy Ree's pieces, and given that with quite soon afterwards we had lockdown, I didn't get access. It's impossible to get access to the collection, and so I was looking at Lucy Ree's work mainly online, so it was moving beyond the collection of the Craft Study Centre, and finding out about her life and times. And one of the things that had really sort of drawn my attention to her work when it was in the cabinets were things like her mixing together of two clays, for example, and the way that she used her glazes, working with sgraffito work, and also with bright colours sometimes, like canary yellow or turquoise blue. So those are things that stayed with me. And the edges on some of the pots as well. But I was also, because of what was happening at the time, very much concerned with our current times, if you like. And I was thinking very much about how when you centre clay, which is what she was doing as a thrower, there's something about centering yourself. And it seemed very appropriate at that particular time to be thinking about that, because everything under lockdown and was so uncertain. And that also took me back to Lucy Marie's own experience, which is she left Austria in 1938 and started a new life in London from scratch. So she started by making buttons for haute couture. She also formed a relationship with Issey Miyake, which obviously had a resonance with me, with an interest in the way that textile processes fold, enfold, unfold. And, that's relationship to various dye techniques using the pleat. So there was a whole little stash, if you like, of possibilities there. And then the other thing was that under lockdown, I had to think very much about the parameters of what I could and couldn't do, because there wasn't the same sort of access to materials and to, say, having something fired externally as under normal circumstances. So that imposed its own kind of parameters.
I think so, yes. I mean, looking at them, the viewer thinks, well, that's how they are, and they couldn't have been any other way. But, the control you must have to exercise, and the forethought and forevision you must have to create these extraordinary patterns, or are they happenstance? Are they accidental?
There's a mixture, because sometimes they come out really well, and sometimes not so well. So hence we go back to the folding and unfolding. And I would have to, start afresh each time with it. So I carried on until I was happy with the way that they were looking.
And you've experimented with tapestry weaving, I see.
I have. So that was a new sort of venture for me. And again, sort of within the limitations of what I had in terms of yarns at home. So I decided to focus on the colour element rather than the texture. And it was a whole new learning curve.
I think so, yes. And it's interesting that this central element is echoed in so many of your works as well. What does that mean to you? Apart from the centering of the self, or is that what it is for you in all of the works? Because where you have the ceramic centre, for example.
I think a lot of the time the circularity of things is all tied in with ideas of the circularity of life or life's experience. Yeah. And I come back again and again to something that John Berger wrote, which was he was thinking about the way that life's experience folds backwards and forwards on itself. Yeah. And so it's all those things that are connected, if you like, that make a synthesis in terms of the work.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, Cara, so this is a piece, one of the pieces in the exhibition, that was actually made for a specific location. Could you just say what location it was for to start off with?
This was made for the spinning hall at Salts Mill up in Saltaire, and it was once the largest room in the world. So it's in a state of some decay, which made it a very interesting space to work with.
Yeah. I always felt that it looked like, this was seeping up from the floor, which of course it wasn't. It was this artifice, but it works perfectly. So here, you're in a completely different setting. You're in a white cube, So are there certain things you'd like to draw our attention to in the new setting that doesn't have that narrative behind it?
Well, it's very interesting for me to see it in different circumstances, because I think in some ways there's a loss, but there's also a gain. Because what works very well here is the shadows and that sort of interplay of the shadows and the labels. And I suppose thinking about some of those elements was, I've been asked before about the meaning of the labels, and what these are a whole number of, a list, if you like, of mills and textile works on a trajectory between Saltaire and Bradford. And when I was thinking about the piece, I also wanted it to be embedded in the community, so that people who had perhaps had knowledge of the area or had worked in the mills would identify with it because of, you know, they would recognise some of the names, and likewise some of the writing, Moheb Poplin, Calamanca, Delay, Broadcloth, a lot of these, which are names of cloth, different types of cloth, available in 1851 when at the Great Exhibition, many of the Yorkshire mill owners took the cloth there and showed it. But a lot of these are no longer part of our lexicon. But to people that have perhaps worked in mills and have good knowledge of fabric, they will know what this is about.
I mean, what's immensely poignant, actually, I mean, are the way the labels are shadows on the wall, and we can no longer read them, but we see the shadow on the wall, which is like the shadow of what's gone, you know, what we've lost. You know. An absolutely stunning installation. Going back to the centre and the woven tapestry centre there, here of course you've got the porcelain centre as well. You know. Was that about fragility? Or?
Yes, it's about fragility, ephemerality, and one of the things that I was interested in doing was to, you know, saying something about the intimacies of life lived daily in this huge vast room amongst the clatter of machinery. So I wanted to make a space of close vision, pulling the viewer in to look a little bit more closely and to see, you know, the intimacies, the texture, if you like. So the idea of a creased cloth, a curling collar, a bit of a pinafore, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. You can look closely but don't touch. Now we've moved completely away from the circles and into what could be seen a different body of work with different preoccupations, but perhaps not. Would you like to talk a little about surrogates 1 to 4?
Well, these evolved as a result of changing circumstances, which was that my father got Alzheimer's, and I was spending weekends travelling down to Dorset to do what I could to support him. And that sort of rather curtailed my activities in terms of what I could do with my practice. So I took to the needle. And so it was a sort of, in some ways, I was thinking about older works that I'd got and archiving them, redrawing them, if you like, tracing old experiences. So I had a whole number of works, you know, still with me, such as pleated works, which is what this has come from. And what I did was I scanned them and then redrew them and then redrew them again using a stitch that skimmed under the surface or the skin of the cloth. So they're not stitched in and out. And I was thinking of it as a retracing of experience, but as something that would produce new possibilities, different activities for myself, but new possibilities. And as I continued to work with these ideas, and as my father's health degenerated, I found them just becoming more and more cellular in a quite strange way. So, you know, there was this undercurrent, if you like, of that happening.
We've got your trademark almost.
The red thread.
Yes, well, and the threads coming up. Could you sort of say something about that in terms of these particular works?
Well, I suppose, you know, I've in a lot of works over the years, I've almost constantly had a red thread. And for me, it's a sign of some kind of continuity. It's become a sort of trademark.
Okay. And if we look at the configuration here, this movement, it's echoed very much in the piece hanging in the foyer. Was that deliberate, or was it?
It was deliberate because these have come from previous pieces. Some of them were bound, so some of them were pleated. So you get different kinds of responses when you're drawing them.
Thank you, Caroline. That was absolutely fascinating and a real insight into your process over just a few of the objects in this exhibition. So I really recommend, do come and see the full exhibition. It is wonderful. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you, Leslie.